So with this in mind, what kinds of attending might be required to resist the coming barbarism? What matters to us now and what is valuable? And what kinds of pedagogical orientations and processes might make these things possible? What might thinking in the middle do to pedagogy? And how might we imagine pedagogy as a co-composition, as situated in the milieu, in the commons, and in the middle of something, as Stingers proposes? So let's think about what kinds of methods might be required to create a commons, to move beyond the individual and think collectively in the milieu, in the context of something. And I think this is a central concept to think with as we conceptualize curriculum in the making and pedagogy in current times. As educators, we're not delivering curriculum objectively or merely passing on knowledge, but rather curriculum is actively produced and made. And as it's made, it's intimately informed by ways of thinking and doing, and that our positionality as educators are deeply situated in how pedagogy is enacted and how it's collectively composed. So I invite you to begin holding on to some of the threads and some of the concepts proposed by Stingers in the text and some of the meaning that you've been making throughout your portfolio entries, and carry them with us into the studio week in week 9. So consider questions such as, what is a commons? What are the orientations that might be necessary in creating a commons? What might be the role of the educator, the image of the child, ways of being together within a commons, and how might studio processes enable us to think through a commons collectively? What might our studio pedagogies enact in response to the propositions that Stingers is giving? So Pasini Ketchabau, Sylvia Kind, and Lori Kocher, in their book Encounters with Materials, write, if our methods make the world in particular ways, if the nature of the attention that we give to things shapes that which we are considering, then we need to invent practices that help us get to know things differently and get to know things within their complexity. The ways that we attend to things matter. So in this way, education is never a neutral act. We're always producing something, and we're actively creating subjects. We're implicated in the construction of meaning and its effects. Therefore, our pedagogical work requires an orientation that actively investigates the methods and meaning that we're constructing with others and the consequences of that meaning. So what are we throwing into the world, and what might it do, and how are we implicated in the consequences of that which we throw? So next week we'll be considering more what kinds of conditions might be required to cultivate heterogeneous knowledges by thinking through a milieu, responses that are alert to the dangers of generalization, and the captures of this transcendentalism that Stingers talks about. Responses that are made by questions that emerge locally situated, they're exceptional, they're specific to a particular place. So in this way, our pedagogical response is not an approach or an application to practice. It's not something that can be implemented, but rather we're thinking of pedagogy as a way of creating conditions or occasions for thought, tentatively, impermanently, and never stable. Because the world that we're responding to, the world that pedagogy is in conversation with, doesn't stand still. So therefore pedagogy also must be always becoming and situated in that space between milieu and subject formation. So the making of rationalities that are activated by thinking that's in place. So this pedagogical work is very specific. It cannot be reproduced or transported. And I think that this is something that Stingers is proposing to us, to avoid that generalizable, transcendental knowledge and situate thinking in the midst of a very specific milieu. And I think the chapters this week are very pedagogical in nature. So as you're reading and as you're engaging with the portfolio entry, think with this idea of the middle, the milieu, and imagine what this position of being in the middle, thinking in the middle, does to yourself as an educator, and what it proposes pedagogically. So this week in your portfolio entry 6, you will be creating a collage using drawing, writing, poetry, original photographs, whatever avenue works for you. This collage should be a creative response that conceptualizes or plays with the idea of being in the middle of something. So it should be a response to this week's readings and Stenger's call to situate knowledge construction in a specific milieu. So this is a flexible assignment, and you can respond in a way that helps you think more generatively about what it might be like to think in the middle of something, what it might mean to situate pedagogy in the middle of something, as opposed to a linear beginning, middle, and end. What happens if we begin in the middle? Yeah, so I think that's it, everybody. Everything will be posted on Moodle in a few minutes, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a Skype meeting. And yeah, looking forward to seeing how this week takes shape. Thanks, everyone.